we talked about how the issue of the cause of suffering and the nature of the existence of suffering and the cause of suffering. Another more general way to categorize that is to say that there's a state of consciousness that sentient beings are subject to, that in the Hindu tradition, in the ancient Hindu tradition, and then was subsequently adopted by Buddhism and other traditions, the Jains, the Sikhs, is the term samsara. Samsara is a common word and it's used extensively in Buddhism to summarize the idea of this limited state of consciousness that's ultimately based on a misunderstanding of reality. It's based on the sense that you're a separate being, that you're alienated from others. Like, in other words, the opposite would be a radical sense of interdependence, of interrelatedness, and the deep sense of wholeness and completeness that comes with that. But samsara is a state of mind that's actually based on a sense of a deep misunderstanding, kind of in our bones. It's in our minds. It's in our nature on all levels. This kind of implicit, taken for granted feeling and experience and sensation that I have moments of connection, but it's not my nature. It comes and goes, and it's often not as profound as it could be. But by my basic nature is I'm a distinct, separate being. And because of that comes out of that desires, aversions, gain and loss, all kinds of fluctuations in life, times when we feel better about times ourselves, some other times we feel worse, times when we get our desires fulfilled, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we grab on and hold on to something and then we lose it. It's constantly fluctuating. So one of the key conditions of samsara is that it's subject to change. Not only the outer conditions of life are changing, even the internal conditions of our consciousness, our own personal nature is constantly changing. And the Buddhists call that the truth of impermanence. So samsara is considered to be permeated with the sensation of separation, of impermanence, and therefore of what the Pali term is dukkha, which means a sense of it's hard to translate this word because it's very encompassing. It's a very, very deeply, intuitively rich term, but it means suffering, discontent, dissatisfaction, incompleteness, imperfection. It can range from horrible suffering to just that wasn't what I hoped it would be, or something's not quite right, or like a gnawing sense of incompleteness or discontent. Encompasses all of that dukkha. So samsara is tainted, if not overtly permeated, with a sense of different kinds of experiences, always with dukkha being around the corner or dominant in your experience or tainting your experience. And part of that is because of impermanence. A big part of the experience in ordinary life is that even when we're happy, either later we'll experience a change of our state of mind, a change of circumstances, and that condition will change and our happiness will pass. Or even in the experience, we might feel like we're haunted by the reality that we'll probably lose this at some point. It seems fragile. So another way of talking about the first two noble truths is that it's the truth of samsara, the truth of the reality that life's imperfect as we ordinarily experience it. And the ultimate diagnosis of samsara, like what is this? Why is this happening? Is that it's caused by misunderstanding. It's caused by a fundamental misperception of the nature of reality. So in that sense, in order to achieve nirvana, which is the opposite of samsara, which is awakening to the true nature of things, you don't have to go away from the world to realize that, because it's not a change of location, it's a change of understanding. It's a re-perception of everything. It's like experiencing the same reality you've ordinarily been living within, but now with a fundamentally new understanding of who you are and the true nature of everybody and the true nature of everything. And one of the ways, it's hard to put that into language or into even philosophical ideas, like what that realization is. But one way that I think, does a fairly good job, at least this shows an important angle on it, is you feel a deep sense of interconnectedness with all of life. So, in a sense, you could say then another way of looking at the Four Noble Truths, you could break them down into the truth of samsara and the truth of nirvana. And of course, we can speak about those and those terms in different ways. Nirvana is one way of talking about this state. We can call it liberation. We can call it enlightenment. We can call it non-dual realization. We can call it God consciousness. We can call it self-realization, union with the Tao and harmony with the Tao, or, countless other terms. But in Buddhism, one of the original terms that the Buddha used was, he called it nirvana, and that's still in use today in all the schools, but many other terms are used as well. So there's this basic distinction between samsara and nirvana, and that's very foundational. And we actually don't just start off like we're in the ordinary human experience is embedded in this state that the Buddha called samsara. But the odd thing about it is that we don't realize that that's the case. We're so used to it that we don't know. Usually we understand something by contrast. So if we haven't at least heard about nirvana or enlightenment or awakening, or begun to get a taste of it, maybe we've been lucky and had some glimpse of it. Maybe we meet a person, see in the Buddha's case, in that life as the Buddha, his first taste of nirvana was he saw a monk that was in a deep state of inner peace. That was his, little glimpse. It wasn't, he didn't realize it deeply himself, but his ability, the part of him that was awakened enough to nirvana deep inside of him, so that when he saw that monk, he knew something is important about this. I can see, because other people meet monks and nuns and other awakened people. They don't have to be renunciates, and it doesn't mean anything to them. People met Jesus, and that some people even just denounced him. Some people crucified him. That's not really getting it. So they were exposed to somebody that was in a state of nirvana. They didn't get it at all. So if you meet that person who embodies it enough, they don't even have to be fully realized in it, and something stirs in you, that's the beginning of your own kind of awakening process. So, but most of the time, if we haven't begun that process, then we don't really know, by contrast, how deeply we're involved in samsara, because it's it's like it's two possibilities, two states of consciousness, two ways of being, two ways of understanding reality, two ways of feeling about yourself and about life. And so, interestingly enough, even though we're embedded in samsara, part of awakening, part of the process of awakening, is actually realizing that this is samsara, the state that I'm in. I'm in a state of samsara. I'm in a state of and discovering the intimate details of all the subtle ways that we're entangled in this state. So the more we practice, the more we actually understand samsara. And the deepest levels of really understanding samsara come at the deepest stages of awakening, because we have that much wisdom, that much clarity. We see the nature of samsara with that much wisdom, that much understanding. So at first, when I first encountered in this life the teachings of Buddhism and samsara, I loved aspects of it, and other aspects I didn't like at all. And one of the aspects I didn't like very much at all was samsara. I didn't like thinking about all of this. See, but different lives, and in this life I was born into a Christian family and a Christian culture to some extent. And I had some Christian past lives and other lives where I had other cosmologies. So part of me, for various reasons, I believe that there was a purpose behind all of this, and that the suffering that we were experiencing had a meaning, an absolute meaning, that God created the universe for some purpose, and that part of the way that we could come to um, become at peace with the suffering in the universe is to figure out what that purpose was that God had for whys. And so when I heard the teachings on samsara, which is a little bit different point of view on that, I was like, no, I don't buy that. So I was there deep studying things like Vipassana and Zen, and reading Hawaiian philosophy and studying koans and all kinds of, as well as other things, Hindu, Sikh, and otherwise. But I didn't really like this idea of the Four Noble Truths and suffering and samsara and all of that. And it took about maybe, I don't know, 10 years. In the early 90s, I was in a deep phase of meditation just after we moved to Mount Shasta. And I remember, I literally remember one day walking outside. I had been meditating for several hours already that day. It was a period of deep retreat. I was walked out in the yard in the house we were living in. I remember looking at the landscape. Mount Shasta was over on the right, and there would be huge pine trees in our yard, and I could see part of Mount Shasta sticking out from behind the trees, kind of the northern slopes of the mountain. And suddenly I just had this intuition sweep over to me that I just realized this is all this state of consciousness I'm in primarily, this partially awakening, but this is samsara. It's hard to explain, but it's sort of like this thing I had been resisting just locked in, and I just entered the state where I got it. It was like a type of awakening, you might say. And I just realized, just quietly, with a little bit of residual reluctance, I just sort of surrendered to this truth. It kind of like I had been beaten into submission by just my meditations, and I was like, okay, I get it, I see it, I can feel it, I can intuit it. So I still, Buddhism, teaches this, what I consider to be sort of like this harsh, sobering, difficult truth to face, which is that there is this reality that ordinary human consciousness, sentient life, animals, plants, we're all in this state where we have this fundamental, and it's not less rational or philosophical or something. It's just almost more visceral. It's in our bones, it's in our cells, it's embedded in our emotions and our this hidden truth that is deep in our being, that we just don't understand reality. We're in a sort of fog of delusion and confusion. And we can do our best to enjoy it. We can make the best of it. You can actually generate, samsara allows you to generate extremely positive states. You can, for instance, learn how to meditate, and through meditation, generate powerful positive karma that will lead you into states of tremendous bliss, tremendous peace, tremendous clarity, tremendous joy. But if you're still doing it out of attachment, in other words, if those states are born out of you trying to generate those states and avoid other aspects of reality, like suffering, then there's a subtle attachment there, which means you're still hooked into samsara. You're still desiring, you're still craving. The only way to extinguish that suffering is not by running away from it, like becoming successful at something, or generating great meditation states, or becoming very famous, or whatever it is that you think will make you happy. All of those things, if they don't arise out of deep wisdom, if they come out of a subtle or more less subtle attachment, then they're impermanent and they won't last. So it's possible to have that kind of bliss in a permanent way, but it's different. In Buddhism, there's a sort of scale, a system of identifying different kinds of happiness. And there's happiness that arises in these kind of states from these kind of desires, all the way up to the most sublime kinds of bliss and joy. But even those in the second to highest category are not perfect, because they're still generated through limited forms of attachment and limited understandings of reality. In order to really have the highest happiness and bliss and peace, you have to have a non-dual wisdom about life. And then a profound sense of inner peace is realized, and a profound sense of contentment and freedom from suffering and bliss even, but it's a special kind. It's sort of like there's a whole bunch of different kinds of happiness, and then there's one other kind that's in a separate category, and that's nirvana. That's perfect happiness. That can't be damaged. It can't be taken away. It's not impermanent. It isn't subject to outer conditions. And it's the sum total of all the other kinds of happiness refined to their most perfect form, their most elegant, their most satisfying, their most exquisite form, and realized eternally, permanently, but not in a way that gets boring. See, that's another thing people think, oh, that sounds kind of boring. No, if there's any boredom in your awakened state, then it's not nirvana. Nirvana is much more sublime and beautiful than that. And it comes with a sense of sort of like eternally self-refreshing joy and perfection and bliss at all times. And there's a whole infinite path beyond that where you can maintain that state and continue to be part of life. And at the outer level, you're participating in stories of trying to help other beings, working with planetary evolution, whatever your calling is. And all the time you can stay in that state of nirvana at the same time. So that even when things don't go ideally in that outer story of what you'd like to, you're trying to work in part of a group and you're working for some project, and then something doesn't work out about it in the end. Outwardly, you might say, okay, well, that was unfortunate that we were trying to have this happen. But inwardly, you're in a state of perfect peace, perfect equanimity. And you know that there's more cycles, there's more opportunities. It's all part of a process of learning. And so you just have a great spaciousness and openness, a deeper perspective. So I do believe, by the way, that there is what could be called relative purpose in life, even though the universe itself, samsara, and an ultimate reality, the non-dual nature of reality, transcend concepts like that this was created by a being or that it has a purpose. It's not purposeful. It just transcends concepts like meaningful or meaningless, purposeful or purposeless. Those kind of categories can't touch the depth of the true nature of reality. It's bigger than all of those ideas. Those are human ideas, and even some archangels have ideas like that. All kinds of beings can have different kinds of ideas about reality. Reality is bigger than anybody can possibly conceptualize or conceive of in that way. But at a relative level, I can say for me, I have a purpose. I can join in with other beings, like as a bodhisattva. My purpose is to help beings awaken from samsara, the state of consciousness of limitation and misunderstanding and suffering. And there's this a sacred, deep, ancient tradition that's lasted throughout eternity of beings joining the ranks of bodhisattvas and Buddhas, Christs, and liberated beings, and working towards the upliftment of sentient beings throughout samsara. That's a profound sense of purpose. And so you can have this beautiful and sacred sense of purpose in life. It's just not necessary to say that that's the reason that the universe exists. The reason that the universe exists is a transcendent, incognizable reality that in the non-dual teachings of not only systems like Buddhism, but also others. The Jains have a similar philosophy. The Taoists do. Many schools of Hinduism do. And there's even some kind of more modern non-dual Western schools as well. And that comes later in the write-up. You'll see under the heading Ajatavati. Those are some of the Hindu and Buddhist terms for this notion. So when for instance, in my own practice, when I attune to beings like members of our own planetary lineage or the solar logos, it's in part to participate in an expanded sense of purpose, a vision, a plan. And it's based on collective awakening. It's based on the notion that all beings can attain Christ consciousness, and it's inherent in their nature as human beings. It's why we come to the human kingdom, to participate in that project. So all of that's saturated with purpose and plan and sacredness.